Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Donut Hole, your place where a couple of guys sit around and pontificate. My name's Paul,
And I'm Jason.
and we're coming at you from our studios here in Nashville. It is June 23rd. Apologize in advance about the goofy outfit. I'm actually leaving for an overnight security job right after we get out of here, so yeah, we've gone a week without an episode. Figured might as well get this one done. It was kind of a little bit of a juggling act, but managed to get it done, so apologize about the goofy outfit, but that's what's going on with that. Yeah. Actually, about that, apparently, what the deal is with this place, the reason we're doing it, this job, and it's kind of last minute, is because during we've had a bunch of thunderstorms lately, and it's knocked the entire power grid down at this place. So
Yeah, I know here lately there's been I've been seeing on Facebook a lot of people lost power for 10, 12 hours at a time
Yeah.
during these storms.
so like their entire fire suppression system's down, everything's down at this complex. So I'm there for that.
Right.
So yay, lucky me.
Yeah.
12 hours after doing this all day, and then I get to watch the kids tomorrow all day. So 36-hour day.
Yep.
That'll be fun. All right, so let's get into the show. I know we were talking earlier about while we were doing show prep, so I guess let's get to the first one thing we said we were going to talk about, which is the issue in the state of Oregon.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's some senators, Republican senators, that are like, we're not. The Democrats have a supermajority. They're trying to pass this carbon tax, but there has to be X amount of people there in session for them to actually vote on it. And all the Republicans are kind of doing a protest walkout, which is technically in violation of the state constitution. So now the Democrat governor is sending the cops after them.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently it was all over a carbon tax. It was a cap and trade type thing. And all these senators represented rural areas where, Oregon, just like most places in today's world, the rural areas aren't too prosperous. There's only a few industries, one of which is logging, and it takes a huge amount of fuel to move all those logs around, and would really affect that industry. And the Republican senators felt like it was really the only way with the Democrat supermajority that they could get their voice heard was to do this walkout. And unfortunately, the governor decided to get the state police after them.
Now, it's kind of funny that apparently back, was it about 10 years ago or so, the tables were turned and the Democrats walked out, and the Republican governor at the time just like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
You can actually protest this way.
Yeah, I think it was sometime in the mid 2000s, and it was over, I believe, a teacher's raise, something having to do with education. The Republicans had a majority. The Democrats walked out, including the now governor, who at the time said it was an appropriate thing to do.
Yeah.
And the Republicans did not call the police on them. So you got to see it as a little bit hypocritical for the current governor to be involved in a walkout of her own, and now resorting to escalation as her resort.
Possibly even violent tactics. I believe you said there was one senator who said something to the extent of, they better bring like a small army or something like that.
Oh, he said, you better send heavily armed bachelors. So now most of the senators, apparently, from my understanding, are hiding out of state. So not much they can do about it there. And I know that from the articles I've read, which it's been real sketchy. I haven't read it off of many mainstream news sites.
Mainstream news sites aren't going to report on this.
Right. And apparently the neighboring state police said, no, we're not getting involved in, your political dispute.
Yeah. Good on them for that. Yeah, it's starting to get to the point now, like I've been saying, that, things are going to start escalating. And, the whole idea of a peaceful democratic process within our republic is going to start to deteriorate. And we're starting to see, violent tactics being used.
Yeah.
Which lends itself to the fact that we're going to descend into Yugoslavia here pretty soon.
Yeah.
So, buck up and get ready for it.
And, in this case in particular, it's one of the Republican senators was quoted as saying, I will not be held a political prisoner in my own state, in the United States. And I'd have to agree with that, even though this is allowable. But, there are some people saying, well, this is unconstitutional, this is illegal. That is not the case. It is, legal by Oregon state constitution. However, just as a matter of civil discourse, it's just instantly jumping to the maximum escalation. There could be compromises. they could say, okay, we'll lessen the bill and maybe get half of what we want, half of what you want.
Yeah.
But there's just a complete refusal to do that. And it's and forget about the senators themselves. You have to think that those people who elected those senators are feeling like they don't have a voice.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that's the thing is, they don't care about the minority when it happens to be
The other guy.
rural, farmers, lumberjacks, those people don't belong in the new leftist utopia, So nobody cares about them. They should come to the city and join the rest of us, is what you hear. But I don't know where we get our wood then.
Well, it doesn't matter, because wood just magically shows up at Home Depot and Lowe's.
Yeah.
And, the other building supply stores. So,
Well, and if you ask the leftist in Portland, I'm sure they'd say we don't need to cut down a single tree, which I don't know where they'd get their furniture from.
we'll make it out of recycled plastic.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, overall, it's a bad situation. But at the same time, I kind of fall along the fence of if I were one of these Republicans, I would show up and vote on it because I would basically say to the voters in my district, hey, I know we're not getting what we're wanting, but it is what the voters of Oregon as a whole want, and if we're ever going to get past this, we have to let them see the consequences of their action. If we keep shielding the left from the consequences of their actions, you're never going to see a change because they don't see the consequences of their actions. Say, hey, it's done democratically, and when the industry starts tanking and dying, who's going to have to deal with that when the next election comes up? It's the leftists who put that policy.
Well,
in
no,
place.
I disagree. I think the leftists usually do see the consequences of their actions ultimately at the end of the day because their states go into the crapper and then they leave and then bring their toxic policies with them.
Yeah.
That's what we're starting to see here in Tennessee as well.
And it's what's really disturbing, and the reason I try to use the term leftist instead of liberals is, 15, 20 years ago, a big part of the Democrats' campaign would be trying to get the people who are the lumberjacks in the rural communities saying, hey, we need to get them higher wages, they're poor, we need to get their life situation a little better. And it seems like when liberalism has went so extreme, it's turned into leftism. These rural people, these factory workers, how Trump won Michigan and Pennsylvania, seems like the Democrat Party just left them behind. And it's no longer about workers so much as it is about a leftist agenda.
Yeah.
And at least you could say 20 years ago they were for the workers. And I think the workers have seen the Democrat Party turn their back on them.
Yeah.
At least if you're a certain type of worker.
Yeah. Pretty much.
And it's we're seeing it in every city, and I see it up close and personal with the people I work with the people I'm around in the city. A lot of them, they don't like, even the Democrats and liberals, they don't like these, extreme identity politics. They don't like some of these extreme rules if they affect. But the problem is a lot of these city dwellers, it doesn't affect them directly. And like most people, if it doesn't affect them directly, they just don't really pay attention to it. And they don't understand that, yes, maybe what's good for the city and helping the city is hurting everybody around it. And we see that in Nashville every day.
Oh, yeah. Bird scooters.
Speaking of which, as an aside, Nashville did ban bird scooters.
Finally.
The mayor, I'll give him kudos here. We had a death recently, a young man. He was drunk, and it was his fault, but yet at the same time, if they didn't have scooters just available outside every bar, he would not have, this wouldn't have happened, and he would be home with his family. So, and as a person who drives down there frequently, I got to say, good on Nashville. They're not quite gone yet. I think they have to go through the process of ending the study period or what have you that they did for these things and getting them out of here.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Small victories.
Yeah.
So I guess going from local and national politics, let's move into the international realm. Don't know how many of you guys have been following the protests in Hong Kong. Apparently, the what has been going on there is there was a murder in Taiwan from a Hong Kong citizen. The Hong Kong citizen fled back to Hong Kong, and given the fact that Hong Kong belongs to China now, there is no extradition policy from Hong Kong back to Taiwan. and vice versa. So the Hong Kong legislation passed, or was in the process of trying to pass and ratify a bill that would allow extradition from Hong Kong to both Taiwan and mainland China. Because obviously the Chinese CCP is not going to let them just do it with Taiwan. It has to go with mainland as well.
Right.
So initially, what was going to be kind of a good bill ended up turning into a disaster because now, in theory, although technically political crimes are excluded from the bill, all the Chinese government would have to say is, "Oh well, they were jaywalking. We want them back." You know,
Yeah.
whatever kind of trumped up charge that's not political, and
Right.
then they charge them for the political crime as well. So the Hong Kong people realized this was what was going to happen. And in a city of like 7 to 8 million people, there were over 2 million protesters in the street. And looking at all the stuff, I mean, that, you know, for the most part, the protesters behaved themselves pretty well. They cleaned up their garbage. They, you know, weren't behaving like most protesters you see.
I was going to say, especially in the U.S., you can learn a lot from that.
Yeah. I mean, they even, like, you know, there was even cleanup crews after the protests where some of the protesters got together and
Yeah.
cleaned up their mess, which
Yeah.
was really nice to see. However, it's definitely noted that the Hong Kong police definitely were being quite brutal in their subversion tactics. You know, I've seen some videos where they just, you know, start bludgeoning people,
Right.
which was not cool. And it looks like that's going to be set aside now, and they're not going to vote on it anytime soon.
Yeah.
Which is good, I guess. You know, for now at least, we'll see how this ultimately plays out. But yeah, that would have been something really bad for the people of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, it just it lends to a growing authoritarianism, I think, in the world in general. But you know, I had high hopes for China 5 years ago that they were moderating and, you know, going to become you know, basically a citizen of the world and
Yeah.
and behave in a proper manner.
Oh, I did too, but
But ever since Winnie the Pooh, you know, decided to become president for life,
yeah,
they're really taking a lot of steps backwards. And honestly, we're seeing this, you know, throughout the Western world as well. And honestly, the only reason I think it hasn't happened in the U.S. yet is we're so divided that we keep going back and forth between two parties that are polar opposites, and we're not really landing on any authoritarianism here. But you look in Europe, authoritarianism's rising. And it could be argued on both sides because, you know, you look at Hungary and Poland being more right wing, and of course Western Europe being extremely left wing. It just seems to be we're in that cycle right now.
yeah, it does. Speaking of other international politics, the whole thing in Hong Kong has definitely bolstered the support of the DDP, which is the other political party in Taiwan, because you got the KMT, the Kuomintang, and then the DDP, which is like the liberal progressive party.
Yeah.
President Wen's actually part of the leftist policy, or political party there, and it's kind of funny because the way theirs works is she's very left on like a lot of things, like green energy, this, all that other kind of crap. But on the flip side, she's very pro-independence, screw you, China, even more so. Which is a very, very weird to wrap your head around because technically the KMT are the ones at war with China. And the KMT is, you know, they were the nationalists and they're the ones that technically were in a civil war. And now they're like trying to be buddy-buddy with China, which is absolutely hilarious. But due to the fact that the people of Taiwan have seen how the one-party, two systems is working out in Hong Kong and how the mainland Chinese are trying to ram this crap through, they're definitely siding more with the DDP, which is more independent, you know, independent Taiwan, you know, pro that. So her numbers of President Wen, current administration there, her numbers have gone through the roof in their upcoming election, which I think is this year or next year. I can't remember which, but because they're going through their political process right now as well.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's definitely interesting times we live in. You know, Brexit party recently had a large victory in the EU Parliament. You're seeing a lot of nationalist movements, like you're saying in Taiwan. You're seeing, you know, even though they're the leftist party, they're more nationalist than the right wing party.
who are actually nationalists?
Yeah,
I figured
it's
that out.
funny, but and I think a lot of this rising nationalism is simply coming from we discussed authoritarianism, but it's this overarching world authoritarianism that has to touch everybody, and countries want to make their own way. You know, they don't want to have to listen to the what's the opinion of the latest trade organization of how we should do things. And you look at the U.S. for years, we've been doing things according to
The rules.
yeah. What's best? Well, what's best for NATO? What's best for our trade partnerships? What's best for, and slowly you have states like West Virginia, like Arkansas, where it's they've just eroded to there's no jobs, people are on drugs, and even the Democrat Party, who used to be the party of supporting people like that, saying, "Hey, we're forgetting about the small folks," they're being forgotten about.
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing a lot of that across the world. That everything has gotten to be such a focus on economies, international trade, international relations, and the small folks who are stuck on the bottom level. It just seems nobody cares anymore,
Yeah.
and that's a tinderbox.
Yeah, it's going to come back and bite him in the ass.
Yeah.
Actually, kind of funny. Another funny little aside. I can't remember the guy's name, but the former head of the company Foxconn, which I'm sure everybody knows who that is. Big time cell phone manufacturer.
Yeah.
He's actually the one that's Foxconn. Oddly enough, is a business in China, but he's actually the one running as the one of the KMT, which is going to be opposing President Wen. He actually just stepped down from Foxconn.
Yeah.
To be able to do so.
Wow.
So he's, I think, right now the lead KMT candidate.
Oh, another odd connection with that is a lot of these manufacturers in China, which we discussed, are moving out of China because of economic reasons.
Yeah.
But you put the tariffs on top of it. It seems that I've read 2 or 3 different articles where they're moving from China to Taiwan.
There are a few where that's happened.
A few manufacturers are doing that.
Yeah, a lot of them are going to Vietnam as well, though.
Which, honestly, if that continues, that's a good sign for first world countries because Taiwan is not cheap.
No.
Not like Vietnam.
No, for that matter, what we're currently filming the video on is an Asus phone here, and that's made in Taiwan.
Yeah.
You got Asus, MCI, a lot of big name technology companies are based in Taiwan.
And to me, that's a good indication that, once China's economy continues to grow to a certain level, manufacturing may actually come back to the U.S., to Europe. Because the massive amounts of money they have to spend on tankers and are on shipping vessels and fuel, and it costs a lot of money to run one of those vessels across the ocean. And when manufacturing costs are not so low anymore, you may see an incentive to start manufacturing more goods in countries of origin. Which would not be a bad thing at all.
I think you're right with that. That is a possibility, but I think there's still plenty of cheap places left to do business.
Yes.
You still got Vietnam, Malaysia,
True.
Cambodia, Laos.
But they cannot match the volume and the shipping powerhouse that China was.
No, I don't think they can, but I think that they can fill the niche for the really, really cheap stuff.
I do agree with that. And honestly, there's a good niche for that. And honestly, it helps those countries.
Yeah.
I hear the argument from both sides. I understand, you don't want to exploit these people to get cheap goods to the West. But at the same time, if these people don't have any other option to work, and ultimately at the end of the day, if they can make a living wage, it is a good thing for those people.
It is a good thing. And really, at the end of the day, what they're all doing is they're all following in the footsteps of Japan post-war,
Yes.
post-World War II. So what ended up happening in Japan is they followed a direct export-led model growth economy. Which ultimately started out, those of you that are old enough to remember, obviously, will know that go back to the 50s and 60s, all the cheap garbage crap was made in Japan. Made in Japan was a joke.
Yeah.
It wasn't until about the 80s where made in Japan started to have a level of quality. And you started to see the same thing. And then, of course, now made in Japan, you can't do much better.
I was going to say, I order stuff from Japan specifically because of the quality.
Exactly. So, if you're looking for high quality levels, Japan's where you're at. And the same thing happened in Korea. We go back to the early 90s, Korean cars were junk. They, you get like a Daewoo.
Yeah.
Which, Daewoo's still a company, but they don't do cars into the United States anymore. But, at the same time, so was Kia and Hyundai. They were crap cars.
Right.
Nowadays, you get a Kia or a Hyundai, it's still economical, but it's the Toyota Corolla of the 90s.
Right.
Today. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Taiwan was the same thing. You go back to the 70s, early 80s, it was kind of a joke. Nowadays, if something's made in Taiwan, it's usually pretty good quality. And that's ultimately what happens is they start in the lower tier levels. And same thing with China now, actually. Of course, China still has a lot of crap, but there are a lot of things that are made in China that are decent quality. You go back to the early 2000s, Chinese phones were hilarious. They were absolutely
Yeah.
hilarious. I was actually using a Chinese phone when I was there, and it was like just before smartphones were really taking off. It was like you could have, on my phone I had like an MP3 player and all this other goofy stuff. The ringer was louder than a loudspeaker. It was insane. I'm surprised it didn't blow the speaker out. It was just this goofy little gadget that was crap, especially by today's standards. But now, of course, you look and HTC's made there. My current phone that I regularly use, this what is this? I forget what it's called. I feel like an idiot. I'm gonna have to cut. The One Plus. That's what I'm currently using. That is it's a decent phone. Their technology and the bits and stuff that they're making, especially the products coming out of Shenzhen, is their first world. They're, I wouldn't say quite on par with Japan, but they're getting there.
Yeah.
And it's just slowly what you start to see.
Well, just some of the, as you know, my dad loves to buy fishing gear through Japan, and he was explaining to me, he was saying that a lot of the Japanese domestic market gear is now coming from Japan, the lower tiers.
Wait, coming from Japan or?
I mean, coming from China.
Okay.
It's sold, Japanese domestic market, but it's coming from China manufacturing.
Okay.
Because China has gotten a good enough manufacturing that the Japanese people will accept it as a lower end product, and that's actually saying something.
Yeah.
Because the Japanese are used to quality in their manufactured goods, and the fact that and that's basically the difference between the low end stuff and the high end stuff that he's looking at, is that the low end stuff is designed and sold by Japanese companies, but it's manufactured in China, and the high end stuff is all in Japan.
Yeah.
So that goes to show you that China can output quality if they choose to.
Well, it's the same thing. Actually, now for several years, actually probably over a decade, the lower end Japanese motorcycles are actually being made in Taiwan because Taiwan actually puts out a pretty good quality bike. I mean, the scooters that I was riding when I was there, those were, and by scooters I mean like.
He's not talking about birds.
No, I'm not talking like a little stand on. I'm talking like 90 to 120 kph. Let's get going. Sit down scooters. Mopeds, I guess, would be kind of.
That's what Americans would call them, but they're
Yeah.
not technically mopeds. But
Yeah.
yeah.
But those are being made there,
Yeah.
and because the quality's good, it's pretty close to Japanese level quality. So the lower end bikes, like some of Kawasaki's smaller bikes, and things like that, are actually manufactured in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And like I said, the Taiwanese bikes, whether it's the companies like Sim or what's the other one? I always had Sim. There's another company too, and it's regardless, the good quality items.
Yeah.
So
Well, I recently bought a generator, and I ended up going with the Honda, and just super quality Japanese. Everything's but all the second tier products that I looked at, which were only second, I mean, just one step off the bottom, were half as cheap, and all manufactured in China, and all got great reviews.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, the only reason I got the Honda was because I was in a pinch for time, and I could go to a dealership and get one, and honestly, it was nice having the service of the dealership, and they logged the numbers for the warranty and all that. But that being said, a lot of those second tier products that I did a lot of research on coming out of China are pretty good products, and that goes to, well, I've always heard about China that the problem was in quality control, not that they can't do it, they just
Won't.
cut corners because of economics, not because they don't have the skill. They just like to save pinch pennies where they can.
Oh no, that's for sure. Oh, Kimco, that was the other company I was thinking of. When I was there, all my scooters were SYM. So,
But I think we got off on a little bit of a tangent, but going back to the manufacturing base, I think that's absolutely right that, China's economy has grown to where they're going to be producing that mid-tier level product for foreign markets, and that low-tier product is going to move somewhere else.
Yeah.
And economically, it's going to have to. Because why would anybody buy, the low-tier product for just a small discount over the mid-tier product?
yeah, they won't.
They won't. You're going to need those cheap entry-level prices, which is going to bring manufacturing to other places. And then high-end products will move out of China as well because it's getting too expensive to manufacture high-end products. So China's going to kind of be on that mid tier,
Yeah.
which I don't know if that's going to affect the Chinese economy negatively because they're becoming like the U.S. They're becoming a service based. They've grown large enough. You know, a lot of their economy is internal and service based.
Yeah. Yeah, it's slowly becoming that way. And really, if you look at something like, say, the iPhone, granted, the iPhone is designed in the United States, but it is produced in China. And then you compare it to the Korean domestic market of Samsung, well, Samsung high-end Samsung
Yeah.
phones. The high-end Samsung phones versus the iPhone are pretty much comparable in price, comparable in features, comparable in every way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Korea is going to have slightly better manufacturing, but the QC level at Apple is
higher,
is,
yeah.
is just as high.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the initial thing you were talking about. It's all in the QC. The Chinese have had this historical thing, and you actually still see this with the customs office in Taiwan. Oddly enough, that's why they're not above bribes.
Yeah.
And they're kind of a running joke. They kind of consider themselves as like a descendant from the imperial court system where bribery and all
okay,
this kind
yeah.
of shady crap. But there was always this running thing where it was, let's do it as crappy as possible and still meet the QC and still make quota and still make it just crappy enough to where it still passes, but we don't have to put as much effort into it.
Right.
Because then we could focus on volume.
Yeah.
And that's always been a
And
thing.
you can save the money in the process.
Exactly. And that's always been a thing in China.
Yeah.
And now you're starting to see that with some of these other companies that are coming in, their QC levels are having to raise. And once they realize that they can produce the good quality products, they're starting to go with it and starting
Yeah.
to do that now, which is good.
And if they can get the price for them, then they don't have to worry about. But and that's what people don't understand about made in China is that honestly, a lot of what people say is a cheap Chinese product is because the company that's selling that product, which oftentimes are U.S. based companies like Walmart,
Yeah.
they don't give two shits about the quality of the product.
No, they don't.
They just want to move volume just like the Chinese factory does. So they're happy with it. But you know, you were saying that just good enough, and the American model of manufacturing, which honestly probably put a lot of American manufacturing out of business, and I've worked in American manufacturing, and I've had family that does, is let's take the standard and do 20% better for our customers, which is a great thing, but it does raise costs a bit,
Yeah.
and it does slow down production a bit. And then now you got the Japanese model which says let's do it as perfectly as we can, you know, with the amount of money given. Which is even above and beyond the U.S. model.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing, but in today's economic market of everything is about half a penny in volume, it's tough for the U.S. to compete at that scale.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the U.S., our manufacturing really hasn't found a niche like Japan has. Japan has found a niche in super high quality products.
Well, the U.S. still has that niche as well. I mean, there's certain things that, you know, when you think of American manufacturing, obviously when it comes to cars, we're not talking about that.
yeah.
No, I would say we're not. I wouldn't consider cars. Maybe like the higher level like cars.
Yeah.
If you're talking like maybe some of the sports cars perhaps or things like that. But you know, there are things in the U.S. market that are considered higher end that are
Yeah.
on point. Actually, believe it or not, there is a market in China for, especially amongst the upper, the emerging upper and upper level middle class and like, the upper class as well. Things like I think there's an American furniture company. I can't think of what it is. I know Lazy Boy's big. There's another one's like American.
Standard,
American said no. It's they do furniture.
which that's bathroom vanities.
Yeah, they do that too. But like, no, there's a furniture company, and it's escaping me right now. We are kind of off on a tangent. This isn't part of show prep. Stanley. God, something Stanley. What is the furniture company? Well, cut. We're gonna just Google it.
I was gonna say I only buy cheap furniture. The most expensive stuff I've bought is Lazy Boy, and that's mid tier. I've never bought nice furniture.
Oh, I guess it is just called Stanley Furniture. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, but based in High Point, North Carolina. But yeah, this is considered like higher end furniture, I guess, for their market. Oddly enough, actually going back to China, that's something that's, if people think that stuff that we get in the U.S. that's made in China is crap. Don't buy made in China Chinese market things that are like Chinese market.
Yeah.
That's a thing there. If you're actually living there or staying there for an extended period of time, and you need something at the store, and you see the cheapest version of it, do not buy it.
Yeah.
It will break within 24 hours. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
You make sure you go up 1 or 2 notches on the price. You aim for the middle, and that'll be comparable to the cheap crap you get in the US.
Yeah.
And then oddly enough, if you go all the way to the top, a lot of times, if it's China domestic market, if you go for the top, it's not going to be any better than the mid tier. Don't waste your money.
Yeah.
So don't go
Which
to
is-
the end, because the bottom is crap, absolute crap. It will break within 24 hours.
Yeah.
The stuff at the absolute top, if it's domestic market only, is only going to be about as good as the mid tier, and the mid tier is going to be what you get in the West.
Yeah.
So that's what you aim for.
Which is why it's funny. My dad has been on the cutting edge of this fishing gear buying thing out of Japan because that's his hobby. He's retired and he's got the finest of everything. But Japanese domestic market products have become such a thing because of the quality. There's apps now because when I started, buying some small things of this fishing gear, you had to register with a website. You're sending emails back and forth. The English is broken. Then you get your PayPal registry. Once you've made a few orders, they kind of trust you, and then you could just email them stuff. And it was a whole process.
Yeah.
But now they've got JDM apps on your phone where you can search these Japanese domestic products from anywhere in the world and get them shipped to you, which I think is a great thing. And it shows you that there's a market for that quality out there.
Yeah.
That people do want a quality manufactured good. It's a minority. I don't think it's going to take over the world because most people I know like their cheap crap and they like plenty of it. But that's pretty neat though that there is that market.
Yeah. And I'm slowly getting to the point where I'm kind of breaking out of the cheap crap market, and I'm starting to aim for more higher quality things, less things, higher quality, as opposed to having 20 really crap screwdrivers. I'm ideally now looking for the one good screwdriver that you
Right.
can
Right.
use for a while.
Yeah.
Because it's having a bunch of cheap crap is really
It's
irritating.
funny you use that example because Father's Day sale, I just bought some new screwdrivers because my fault. I used my screwdrivers as wedges under things and chisels, and the edges come off of them and they don't work so well.
Yeah.
And you used them as awls, and so I needed to buy some new screwdrivers, and I made the same decision. There was a 20-30 piece set I could have got at a Father's Day sale at a Napa Auto Parts. Not to diss Napa, they're a great company. But, some brand I never heard of. Well, I went and bought the Lifetime Craftsman from Lowe's that only had about half as many for, frankly, more money.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't want to buy crap.
Yeah.
And I knew if the edges rounded off on those, I just take them back and say, hey, edges rounded off, they give me another one.
Yep.
So I'd just rather have that.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, it's better to start aiming for. I guess it's kind of an indicator of your station in life too.
Yeah.
Because when you're young and broke, give me all the cheap crap.
Yeah. Harbor Freight was my best friend.
Right. And that's not to diss on Harbor Freight and then say I don't occasionally go there and pick stuff up, because sometimes you need some cheap crap.
And it's got the place. It's when you're younger and you don't have much money, you can get it done.
Yeah.
It's a great place.
And there's a few things there that you don't need a good thing.
Yeah.
Shop towel rags or something like that,
Yeah.
or little crappy whatever.
Yeah, I bought a generator there one time just simply to recharge a battery on a boat that I had when we were out in the middle of nowhere for $90. And it's because why would you spend $500 on a generator just to simply recharge a battery on a boat? I spent $90. It was good for what it was good for, and basically disposable.
Yeah.
But I can't. I got to give it credit. It was there, and that's what I needed, and the price was right.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I guess currently my wall safe is actually from Harbor Freight.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not expecting craziness to break into my house and steal my wall safe.
Right.
So it's and I did replace the screws that anchor it into the studs
Yeah.
with screws,
it's a big
because they got
line
those little dinky, like you can
Yeah.
just use a crowbar and go boink. There's the
Yeah.
safe. So now I anchored it in with some big honking things. But anyway. Well, guys, I think we're going to take a quick break. We'll get back to you guys here shortly after the commercials, and we'll see you then.
Hi, I would like to take a minute to tell you a bit about HeroSong. HeroSong is a 501c3 non-for-profit organization set up to record the music of veterans, active duty, and first responders who also have musical ambitions. Music is great for the soul, and that's what makes us unique and ever so wonderful. Please check them out and consider giving them your support. Again, that's at herosong.org. Thanks.
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the content. If you are, make sure to press that like and subscribe button right down there. And if there's any material and stuff you would like to see us cover, we're more than happy to do that for you as well. Hope to have some new content coming out for our Patreon subscribers. Those of you that are, in the mood to do that, we also have one of those. Should be pretty easy to find us, the Donut Hole Show. And, yeah.
Yeah, and once we get some more subscribers, we'll probably start a merch store, do some mugs, some hats, things like that. We're just now starting out. Hopefully this episode got our audio quality fixed and continue to move forward for you guys and offer more and more every week.
Yep. So, thanks again, guys. Alrighty, guys, we're back from the break. Anyway, Jason, let's go ahead and start talking a bit about Iran.
All right.
Or Iran. Iran so far away. Couldn't
Yeah.
get away. A little flock of seagulls there. So obviously, those people that have been following the news have undoubtedly seen the whole alleged oil tanker sinking. Mm-hmm. Was it an oil tanker or was it a
Well, they
cargo
didn't
ship?
sink it. It was just damaged.
Was it a tanker or was it
Yes.
a cargo ship?
It was a couple of them, 2 or 3. They were all tankers carrying various petrol products. It wasn't petrol, but
Crude and various other things.
components for petrol. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously, the U.S. government is alleging that the Iranians have, targeted these ships.
Yes. They said that they mined them and don't know. I know they do have a video supposedly of an Iranian ship removing an unexploded mine from a Japanese vessel. I don't know the validity of that video. Of course, none of us do. And I think that's the major proof they have is that they were removing the unexploded mine because it basically said, Revolutionary Guard on the side of it.
Okay, well, on the flip side, how do you mine a ship? It seems like, if there's mines in a place you're not supposed to be, you don't drive a ship through it.
I think that these were the type of mines, think more like a anti-tank mine or something that you place on the side.
Okay.
Like perhaps a magnetic. I don't know how they were doing it, but that is the what they supposedly did is placed those type of mines.
So it's almost like placing charges. It's not
Yes.
like the, giant floating balls that you see with the chain and the anchor that sit on
No.
things, and it's like, your ship hits it, it blows up.
No, these were supposedly like placed charges.
That's okay. I didn't realize that was the case. Because
Yeah.
when I think mines, that's what I think of. I think of like, kind of like as World War II style
Sure.
where you drive the boat into it and
Sure.
it explodes.
Yeah, I think the contention is they were, in the middle of the night, sending squads out to place these charges on these ships.
But why would they then try to remove it?
The supposition is that it was unexploded and it had proof that it was from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So they went to remove one that was basically a dud, and so there would be no proof there.
Gotcha. Okay. So, but it's also seemingly contentious that it possibly was not them.
Yes, even the Japanese, who, which first of all, none of these vessels were American vessels. One was Japanese, if not 2. I don't know how many vessels were involved exactly. It was 2 or 3, and I know that one was, I believe, South American registered. So none of these were American vessels to begin with, and the Japanese themselves said they did not necessarily believe that the Iranians were responsible, and the crew of the Japanese ships had also reported seeing flying objects prior to when the explosions happened.
Gotcha. So, obviously, this is causing a little bit more tension between the United States and Iran.
Yes.
Not a big supporter of the Iranian regime. That said, the current Iranian regime is entirely the West's fault at the end of the day. I mean, if you go back historically, basically they had a duly elected government. The U.S. said, to heck with this, and along with the British, because, British Petroleum Company and what have you. And we said, yeah, screw this. We're installing this guy. He's the Shah. He's, Mr. Awesome. And then, of course, once the Iranian people had enough of that, they're like, yeah, this guy's out. Throw in the Ayatollah. And that's obviously not good. But, when we undermine their first duly elected government, well, we're kind of stuck with the consequences.
Right.
So not a big fan of Iran, but that said, the West has not exactly done wonders in that particular country. And of course, now there was also the downing of a drone.
Yes.
Now, this was a U.S. product or U.S. drone.
Yeah, and this is now there is no argument over the fact that this was a U.S. drone that was shot down by Iran. Now, where the argument comes is that the U.S. claims that the drone was over international waters, and Iran claims that it was over their territory.
Yeah.
So I would probably believe the U.S. on that because you know the cameras on these drones are far more powerful. They don't have to be directly over the target to get the spy images they want to
Yeah.
get. They can be over international waters and easily get the images they want to get. So more than likely the U.S. is telling the truth and that it was over international waters, but at the same time, they were spying on Iran. I don't think the U.S. would put up with that sort of behavior from another country either. And once again, I'm like you, I'm not a supporter of the Iranian regime whatsoever. However, using any of this as a justification for some type of military action, I think is pretty weak.
Yeah.
Especially the tanker thing, being that, yes, it was our allies, but the Japanese are ultimately responsible for themselves. And if they say they don't think it was the Iranians or they're doubtful about the proof, let Japan handle Japan.
Exactly. Now, if if it was the opposite kind of thing, where Japan's like, yes, we know it was the Iranians, they did this to us, then yeah, maybe we step in and say,
Yeah.
okay, hey, not cool. But I mean, if the Japanese are saying, I don't know about this, then we should be like, okay, we'll take Japan's lead. I think whenever we're dealing in a situation where we have to help an ally, we let the ally take the lead in the situation. I think that's the best policy that anybody can have is let the ally take the lead. Because if the ally wants to pursue the matter further, then we support that action. If they want to say, I'm not sure on this, we support their action as well. I think that's probably the best call.
Now, after the drone strike, it was my understanding that we actually had planes in the air going to strike Iran. Just radar sites, missile sites, maybe the sites that were involved in shooting down the drone, something like that.
Yeah.
But apparently Trump had tweeted out, and apparently Trump had pulled back the planes at the last minute. And if he did so, good for him.
Yeah.
He had tweeted out something to the effect of he was asking for estimates of how many people would be killed, and it was 150 people or so. And, he just said this is not a proportional response for an unmanned drone, and pulled back the planes, which...
Yeah.
a lot of people say, oh, that's a sign, the warmongers say, oh, that's a sign of weakness by the U.S., but good on him.
Yeah.
If that were the case.
I think just flying the drones within, half a mile of their airspace would be enough to say, hey, that wasn't cool, don't do it again.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty provocative of the U.S. to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
And one can't help but wonder, and this is both sides of the aisle, I will say this, you hear left-wing people and right-wing people saying the same thing. One can't help but wonder if this is intentional provocation with the drone and whatnot. I know that a lot of Trump's advisors reportedly have been advising him to do military strikes. Then I believe the Pentagon said this would not be a great thing because it may escalate. Either way, I think the best thing to do is right now just leave it alone.
Yeah.
No targets from the U.S. were hit. If Japan wants, finds proof and they want to pursue further action, we can work with our ally there. But otherwise, I think the best thing is just to do nothing.
Yeah, I agree. And that said, the U.S. government has been trying to really deal with Iran militarily, really since the early 2000s, possibly even before then. Obviously, probably since the overthrowing of the Shah. We had obviously issues in the 80s with them with the whole hostage crisis and what have you. So we've always had a kind of a negative relationship with their current regime, which is, of course, why Iran is sided with Russia and China, respectively, geopolitically. But I would say since the early 2000s, it seems to be on record that the United States has kind of wanted to stir up crap in Iran.
Yeah.
And there was that defense report, and you sometimes see it circulating on the internet with a guy listing out a bunch of countries, some of which we've been in. I don't think we've really done it much in Sudan. I don't know why he listed that one, but all the other ones on the list, seemingly, you can check the box: Libya, Iraq, so on. Syria, I believe, was on the list as well. So you check all the boxes there, and he goes through the list, starting with Iraq, going through all these other countries, and then ending with Iran, I think is the quote. Indirect paraphrasing there, but so seemingly it's an area that I guess the U.S. government policy-wise has been kind of wanting to meddle in militarily for a while. Not exactly sure why, other than the fact that they are an ally of, our quote-unquote global adversaries, and the fact that Iran, like Syria, like Libya, have all, and like Iraq, have all dropped the petrodollar.
And that's a lot of, once again, you hear this from, conspiracy theorists on the left and the right, that ultimately a lot of this has to do with economics rather than, internal political policy of Iran.
Oh, well, you see that with Saudi Arabia. I mean, they're throwing gays off buildings, but they're friendly with us and they support the
Right.
petrodollar. So, hey, let's throw gays off the
Right.
building in, Saudi, but let's not do that in the U.S.
Right, right. And if Iran does it, it's really evil, but, if Saudi does it, we kind of turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
So, for the people who would say that it's a lot of this provocation is simply because the world economic system doesn't really participate there and can't really control it, there's probably something to be said for that.
Yeah, I think so too.
The international banking system likes to get their hands on everything they can, and Iran doesn't participate in that.
Yeah. Yeah, let's actually, probably not get too much into the international banking thing.
Yeah, and
We'll
and
be
I-
here
and-
for all day, and I'll be late
And in
for
all,
work.
I was going to say, in all honesty, I have a lot of friends that talk a lot about that, and I tend to go in other directions because, like you said, you can talk all day about that. But at the end of the day, though, it's simply a country that is not participating in world commerce and world affairs, and fairly large population of people. Got oil wealth,
Yeah, I think fourth largest reserves in the world.
and Western countries would like access to those resources in that market. I mean, as simple as that.
Yeah, and due to their current alliances, which is in part due to the fact the U.S. screwed around to begin with.
Yeah.
So, their current alliances with Russia and China, using both the ruble and the Chinese yuan as petro currencies, as
Yes.
opposed to the dollar, puts it in a position where now the U.S. wants to mess with them more. And because they're not, selling in our
Right.
currency, so we can't manipulate the market as well.
Well, and I think the best thing to do is what we have done until Barack Obama made his nuclear deal. Before that, we just had a policy of just, we don't do business with them, boycotts, sanctions, whatnot. We're just not going to participate with commerce with them and just let them, do whatever they do. And they will, they will eventually have a regime change just due to economic influences, which worked well in the Soviet Union. I mean, that's how the Soviet Union fell.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the right way to go. And, if they can make it on their own, being cut off from Western markets, which I don't think they can in today's world.
I don't know. I think that maybe they can, especially with the emergence of China and Russia.
Well, yeah,
becoming,
then they
so
do
they
have
can. Yeah.
other markets. But that's the best way to go. If you oppose them, just say, hey, we're not going to allow you access to our wealth. We're not going to allow you access to our customers. We're just going to shut you out. And I think that's the right policy.
Yeah.
I don't think the Barack Obama policy was a little too hopeful that, hey, if we, try to bring them back into the fold with everybody else and we're here in the 21st century and blah, 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 that would be okay if they weren't run by a totalitarian Islamic state.
Yeah, we don't need any more of those to be quote unquote
Yeah,
allies. At
I
this
don't
point.
think that is going to make them moderate. I think what you would see is basically a Saudi Arabia situation is, oh, sure, they're going to take your money. They're going to sell you oil at a great price.
They'll pat you on the back and then throw gays off a building.
Yeah, then the human rights abuses and whatnot are still going to continue.
Yeah.
So I don't think trying to participate with that current regime more is a good thing.
And this is the problem I had with China, or I have with China now. In the past, before Winnie the Pooh was president, I was always a big fan of, normalizing relations with China, becoming friendlier with them, and having lived there and gotten to know the Chinese people directly. I was really supportive of the idea. But now that we've had a regime change there and things have been going in a much more negative direction, I'm kind of adopting a similar policy with mainland China as well. Just because I do not see this as being positive. And frankly, I think if the West cuts them out, if enough people cut them out, then maybe perhaps a regime change will change there, or at least the loosening of various civil liberties within the country,
Right.
or at least the lack of human rights abuses.
Right.
Which would be good.
And, people can say, I tend to just take that libertarian point of view, which people say it's isolationist. People say Rand Paul, they're isolationist. And I don't even go so far as to, I'm not one of those guys that think we need to close all our military bases in the world. I understand completely, especially being an army brat that grew up in other places in the world. I understand why we do that.
Well, I don't think we need quite as many as we have, but
Correct.
we could tone it
but
down a little
I'm
bit,
in
but-
for a little bit of in between. Like you said, like we're not the world police. Now, if there's just completely egregious actions happening somewhere, like a la the Nazis or Stalin, although we didn't do anything about Stalin,
Right.
so there's that. But then it's kind of your moral duty to step in and go, hey, millions of people are dying here. We need to do something. But as long as it's not to that level, I am for the isolation. It's just you don't do business with them. You don't support their bad behavior. But at the same time, you're not the world police. It's not your job to go to every country in the world and change the regimes to what you view should be.
Yeah.
And I understand, yes, people are suffering, but at the same time, is that the U.S.'s responsibility to police every country in the world and to take care of every citizen in the world? I would say no.
No.
A lot of other countries would agree with me. They would say, no, it's not the U.S.'s responsibility to meddle in the affairs.
Yeah, and the closest thing to meddling in the affairs that I think would be appropriate would be as if a large disenfranchised group that's being targeted by a regime reaches out for help, that we say, okay, well, we're not going to jump in and do anything, but, you go to this place in neighboring country, which we're friendly with, there's a big cache of weapons. You're more than welcome to it.
Yeah.
Knock yourself out. There's a couple of we have a couple of guys hanging out there too to, help you load them in the truck and, they'll teach you how to use them.
Of course, I mean, you say that, but then you look at the Mujahideen, which basically became the Taliban.
Yeah, so you got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think with the whole thing with the Mujahideen, we really screwed the pooch on that because the duly elected government of Afghanistan at the time, while communist, was very Western and progressive in a positive way. I don't mean that in like the progressive movement of the left, although I guess kind of applies because they were communists, but not. You know what I mean? You get what I'm saying here. You had universities, you had people listening to music, you had a much more vibrant culture. And while I say they were a communist regime, they were not completely communist because they still let some aspects of the free market into the country at the time. So I think the fact that we meddled in that was a real big mistake. Ultimately, because what we substituted, women going to school, burqas not being a thing. You might still see some of the hijabs, but that was not even mandatory. It was like Iran was in the 70s before the whole thing with the Shah and the everything else, and of course the Ayatollah going in. I mean, you had women without hijabs at university doing things. They could drive, they could do all these things, and now. What ends up happening is the repressive regime ends up getting supported. That's what we ended up doing, was supporting the repressive, goat fuckers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's perhaps a little extreme to say, but
being it's funny because being vehemently anti-communist like I am, because we all know that communism is the most dangerous political ideology in the history of mankind, by far.
Yeah,
it's the death toll is staggering. However, like you said, I'm all for battling communism, but there's also, you got to pick the lesser of the two evils.
Sometimes,
like you're saying in Afghanistan, the communist government was probably the lesser evil than the fundamentalist Islam, where you have the burqas and the bringing back of the child slaves and whatnot.
Yeah.
That was probably worse. And now maybe we just didn't even do our homework. Maybe we just said, hey, they're fighting the Russians.
That's what we did, I think.
Let's help them out. But if you did your homework into what their political ideologies were, what they were trying to accomplish, it was basically an Islamic totalitarian state, which they did accomplish with the U.S.'s help.
Yeah.
And that's where the unintended consequences. I hear these conspiracy theorists say, "Oh, the U.S. wanted that to happen," and I'm like, nobody's that smart. Nobody can predict the rise of the Taliban and ISIS the way it happened. It's just unintended consequences of our actions. And I don't think anybody wanted that or planned for it. But also, if we would have done our homework, we would have said, maybe we don't give arms to those people.
Well, it's the same thing like what happened in Libya with Gaddafi. Gaddafi was, he was kind of a douchebag to an extent. He was not great to everybody in the society. But the society in large was doing well better than they are now. As far as standard of living.
Right. Gaddafi actually was a huge step forward for them.
Yeah.
Even though he still was not a very good person, he was still a huge step forward for the country.
Exactly. And now the country's in shambles. You have ISIS and various other militant groups running around. It's in chaos.
Yeah.
And it still is. Same thing with Syria. You know, you like or hate Assad. He is definitely better for Syria than the alternative, which was ISIS, which we clearly saw. So do we want ISIS, who's, you know, so fundamentalist that you can't even look, you know, you have to literally do every little thing they say, or Assad, who's like, yeah, you know, commerce, do your thing, da 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 da. Oh, you know, okay, you're a political prisoner, we're gonna, you know, shoot you, but the rest of you guys, you know, just keep going on and you know, move forward. Well, obviously, Assad's going to be the better choice than, you know, the person who's like literally enslaving people.
Yeah.
So
Well, and what the U.S. doesn't seem to understand, and a lot of the people in the U.S. don't understand, and the Western world, is the people in these countries have completely different values than
Yeah.
ours. And that's not to say theirs are wrong and ours are right or what have you, but we can't enforce our views of how a government should be run or how freedom should be on those people. Because a lot of people, you know, when Iraq, for example, when they asked a lot of people to vote, they said, why? And they didn't understand why they should vote. To them, it just didn't matter. Well, it's Saddam or somebody else, somebody who's going to just, you know, do this or that. And they didn't understand about self-governance. And
it's a foreign alien concept. We
Yes,
can't impose our morality on other people necessarily.
right. And while we believe that's the right thing for people, and if they came to it on their own and they said, hey, we want this, then that's fine. That's great. I support that fully. But if they don't want it, we just tend to look at them as backwards and screwed up. And it's, well, is it really our place to say you should share these values and run, you know, by these same concepts we have?
Yeah.
And a lot of these places, just because every culture is different. You know, China doesn't understand things the way we understand it.
Yeah.
And, you know, every place has their different ideals. And a lot of it's just shaped, mainly, honestly, through, you know, traditional culture and religion. A lot of it's just shaped differently. And that's part of self-governance, too. And that's something the U.S. doesn't like to realize is accepting the tyrant if that's what they want to do. If they want to accept that, then that's up to them. It's not up to us to say, no, you're wrong. And I think the Western world kind of has to get over that.
Oh, I agree too. Now, that said, I think that the other countries should have access to learn about other systems.
Absolutely.
So, like at the university level, if they're going to study world economic and political systems, that I think that they should be allowed access to learn about it, to know what it is, and then make a decision for themselves. So, like you said, if it happens organically within a society, that's fine. But to impose it on another society is definitely not moral.
Yeah. And we think what we're doing is we're raising their standard of living, but all these assumptions are based that they're going to do the same things we do and behave the same way we do. Well, obviously they're not going to, and they're from a completely different culture.
Exactly.
So you can't make the assumption that you're nation building, which once again, this is something that the right and left, you know, common citizens both agree on, is you can't assume that this nation building thing is going to work when they don't share any of your values. The way you want to do things may not be the way they want to do things.
Exactly, which is, you know, nation building should only be used if a society comes to it organically, and then aid and assistance perhaps. But you don't go in and impose shit. You can't do that.
And that being said, you know, unfortunately there's no room for gray, and most of life is gray. Most of life lands in the donut hole, somewhere in the middle. But when it comes to interfering in other cultures, there just kind of has to be a red line, and that's it. You let them do whatever they want to do, and now if they cross a red line and they start killing millions of their citizens, of course,
Or attacking their neighbors or things like that.
right,
Yeah.
or invading other countries, of course we have to step in. But you basically have to have that red line of morality, and anything that falls short of that red line, you just have to let them learn their own lessons.
Exactly. And now that said, you know, if they're doing something that's really kind of bad, but not quite, you know, take action bad, you can say, hey, look, we don't like what you're doing. We're going to have to cut some relations here.
Yeah. And that's where the economic sanctions and whatnot come in. and that's just the way you have to work it.
And that's to encourage them to address internal policies and get up to it's just a general good operating international standard, which should be lower than what we have necessarily in the West. But I think there should be like a general operating international standard of basic things. You don't just go imprison people for the shits and giggles.
Yeah.
You don't just kill people indiscriminately. There should be a certain level of rule of law. A certain legal framework. But beyond that, you just let them do them. At the end of the day, and if they violate the lower, we'll call it the purple line.
Yeah.
So you get the red line that's okay. That's when we take action. But then you get the purple line. It's like, okay, well, you violate the purple line, we're just not going to deal with you.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they violate
Yeah,
the red,
and
then we escalate.
And it's so funny how, and I see this a lot from the left when they're talking about the sanctions against Iran, and they say, well, if we would participate more in the world with them, they would moderate. And I'm like, I don't believe that. And the way I view sanctions and things like that, it's not exactly a punishment. It's simply saying, I'm not going to do business with you. And I think everybody views it as a little bit backwards. Like it's yes, it is made to punish them, but I think it's more so made to, we're not going to participate with somebody who acts like that.
Well, it's also an encouragement for them to try to address policies. Now, that said, I do agree that there is a certain truth to what they're saying. I think when we do engage countries, that ultimately economic and cultural exchange with despotic regimes is not necessarily a terrible idea.
No, because that always works out to the world's benefit.
Really well, because you saw what happened in Berlin, for example. Take East Germany in the 1980s. So obviously, Radio Free Berlin is pumping out all this really cool, they're pumping out the Beatles, they're pumping out all this cool, 80s pop music, they're pumping out some Depeche Mode over the airwaves, and you got the people in East Germany with these homemade radios kind of tuning into Depeche Mode,
Yeah.
So they're having a blast, and people are smuggling blue jeans into the country and doing all this, sunglasses and all this cool stuff. They want to be cool rocker kids or whatever. So that permeation of the kind of Western culture into East Germany, little kind of chipping away at it, is ultimately what led to the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of East Germany, and then ultimately the Soviet Union. And it was the same thing with the United States. Same thing the United States did with Yugoslavia. So the United States actually did economically engage with Yugoslavia. We started importing the really crappy cars. And what happened? Well, Yugoslavia fell. Not the same way, and unfortunately not as well as East Germany did, but it happened. And the United States actually did have various economic dealings with the Soviet Union, despite being kind of quote-unquote mortal enemies here. The United States did export a lot of food to the Soviet Union at the time, and I think we imported various items from them as well.
But it's just, and sanctions actually play into that. It's part of the free. It's a free market. It's honestly, with the whole sanctions thing, I know it's on this big antagonistic level on international relations, but when you break it down to a simple concept of free markets, it's the same as you saying, oh man, I'm just not going to do business with that mechanic shop because I know they reuse old parts, they're shady, they do things wrong, they pay their employees substandard, so I'm just not going to shop with you. And you let them know, hey, we're not spending our money here because we don't like the way you're doing things. It's basically it's the same concept, just scaled up much larger.
Yeah.
Is that we don't like the way you're doing things, so we're not going to shop here.
Yeah.
We're just going to not do business with you.
Yeah. And you see the same thing with, say, the vehement militant left saying, oh, we don't like Chick-fil-A because they don't, they're not pro-gay. So you see that as well.
Yeah. And that's their right to do so.
So that's what it is. All right, well, I guess let's end the show out with talking about the depression and anger of seeing the failing geopolitical system here in the West.
Yeah, it's it's really, I think it's affecting a lot more people than they know. We have, it's funny how almost everybody on every side of every issue feels disenfranchised, and how almost everybody on every side of every issue is somewhat correct about feeling disenfranchised.
Yeah.
I think in the West, a lot of it has to do with it's basically become everything's corporate profit. It's just cheap plastic goods. We've lost community. We've lost any kind of cohesive culture in exchange for
crap.
Corporatism. It's
Yeah.
That's, it's so many, it's funny, so many people I hear talk who are so liberal. And in the past, liberals were against the corporatism. They were against the, pop culture and everything being so fleeting and nothing having
Yeah.
any meaning. And the liberals wanted more intellectual discussion. But I see so many liberals now, and they're the worst. You got to have the latest Apple. Did you see the latest Marvel movie? Did you, participate in this corporate thing? And that's all it's about is mass consumerism.
Yeah.
Which has been great for the economy. I won't argue that, but I think it's led to a lack of meaning in Western people's lives.
Oh yeah, here in the West, I mean, we were talking about it out earlier during the break. What is there in the United States anymore? It's like you said, going to restaurants, watching movies, watching TV, and I don't know, just fiddle farting around with crap that doesn't really have any sustenance, meaning, or any real purpose. People feel with lack of purpose, and a lot of it comes from the lack of community, lack of culture degrading to just kind of a cameo of what it used to be,
Yeah.
of what it really is. It's almost like a caricature of
Yeah.
sorts.
Yeah, and I read, I don't know who wrote this, but it was, a guy posted this thing that this guy wrote, and it was some economist or something. But the basic point, and it's so true, they said, the United States, to have the unity in the community, there's only a few things that bring you together like that. One of them is national identity, patriotism, kind of like the 80s. Everybody in America felt that community from that, especially having the Soviet Union as the mortal enemy, it
Yeah.
kind of brought everybody together. Another thing was religion, which the U.S. used to be a majority Christian country. That brought people together in the churches. They'd have the picnics, potluck dinners. They felt a sense of community because even the poor guy who lived in the trailer down the street and you who were the middle class guy over here didn't have much in common, but you went to the same church and you both believed in America. And then the third thing he mentioned was political, is that even though we had Democrats and Republicans, at the core of it, we were still working towards a common goal for all Americans. It was more inclusive. It wasn't so much identity politics and divisive.
Yeah.
And this guy's contention was basically that we've lost all three, and that's why we do feel that emptiness.
Yeah, and with that emptiness will come further division, and with that further division will come the escalation to violence, and with that will come civil war.
Yeah,
So, yay.
yeah. And honestly, I don't know what could, at this point, bring us back together. Politics are completely broken. It's... The left is all about identity politics now, and just basically the left is just campaigning for votes constantly. That's all they do.
Yeah.
Because a lot of their policies, I don't even believe they mean them anymore. They're just trying to get special interest votes.
Well, the radical wings of it, the radical elements of it believe in it.
Yes, and
But-
they're the most dangerous.
Yeah.
Republican Party in a lot of ways is still stuck in the 80s.
In the
Now-
worst ways.
Trump was one of the first ones in a long time to come along and talk about the factory worker, the coal worker, which got him a lot of votes from those places. Although, has anything really been done about that? No, not at all. So, the politics are out the window right there. The United States, through leftist ideology in universities and whatnot, has strayed very far from patriotism and religion. The cause on that one's both the same. And it's funny, I say that being a non-religious person myself, but culturally, we always had a common Christian culture, even if you didn't necessarily believe in Jesus and God the way
Yeah.
the Bible says. And now with, in the 70s, opening up immigration from countries that don't necessarily have that same culture, and the university system on top of it, basically saying traditional American culture is bad. It's basically left us no common ground anymore.
Yeah, pretty much. So, like I said, the only thing I think at the end of the day we can hope for is peaceful separation. And while I do talk about the fact I feel we're going to descend into civil war, don't misconstrue this as I'm calling for it. I'm not saying take up arms and go do bad stuff. Not saying that. We're not there. Don't do that.
No, what I'm saying is vote in, third parties is the best thing we can do right
That
now.
is the only thing to do, but honestly, I don't think it's going to be enough. At the end of the day, I think
No.
the best thing we can hope for is peaceful separation within the different political factions and ideologies within the country. Hopefully, break apart into 4 or 5 smaller nations, I think that's the best thing that can happen at this point. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but and again, I'm not calling for violence, but I think that's what's headed this way.
Well, and a huge unintended side effect, a couple of unintended side effects of the lack of community in any way is jobs are not very good because, the boss doesn't really feel a community with his employees. Nobody really cares. It's all about what you can get for yourself.
Yep.
Making working conditions even worse for, lower income people. Companies just really aren't willing to, say, hey, you've been here 20 years, let's give him a raise. No, instead they say, well, what extra work are you going to do? Well, there's only so much work you can do.
Yeah.
You couple that on top of no sense of community of the businesses being responsible to the customers either. It's basically, as a I will say former libertarian, because I'm starting to rethink some of these ideas. Laissez-faire economics going unchecked is not good for the employee or the consumer. And ultimately, the owners are employees and consumers themselves or not necessarily the owners, but the CEO is still an employee of a company, and he's still a consumer. And what he doesn't realize is it may not be good for him in the long run either.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and at the end of the day, I mean, laissez-faire economic systems are good to a point, but there has to be a certain set of rules that everybody plays by.
yeah.
And there needs to be a cultural understanding within the community at large as what is acceptable and what's not for the long-term prospects.
Yeah.
Because again, if you pay your workers crap and just get as much out of them as possible with no benefit to their quality of life, they're not going to be as active of a consumer themselves,
Yeah.
and therefore, who's buying your crap?
Well, and it's also a lesson here that, yes, poor people have a higher standard of living right now than they've ever had.
Yeah.
But I think Tucker Carlson, the quote he said, he's like, does more plastic Chinese crap make you happy?
Yeah.
And that is not a problem with the employers. That's going back to the community problem, is that at least poorer folks felt like they belonged to something. It wasn't this consumerist culture of that, and that's why people feel more disenfranchised, because they think, well, I want to be a part of that bigger consumerist culture, but I don't have enough money to. Whereas, maybe 30 years ago, that wasn't pushed so much. You were part of another culture. You went to church, you went to the school function, what have you. And now that that's gone, all we have left is the consumerist thing. And when you don't make enough money to be part of the consumerist thing, you feel disenfranchised.
At least not on the same level, yeah.
Yeah. And leads to the drug addiction. And, it's just really bad.
Yeah, and I think you and I have talked about the various stages that we've been going through when looking at this whole thing, because what we're ultimately seeing is the decay and decline of the West. And you start going through the phases of, depression, and then you're angry about it, and the various, it's almost like the stages of grief, if you will, because you are ultimately seeing the death of your civilization, the death of your society. And then, of course, coming to the end of acceptance. And that's not to say you don't hit acceptance and then possibly fall back into some of the other prior feelings, as that happens. Whenever you go through the stages of grief, potentially you bounce through them, back and forth a little bit. And I think ultimately what it's going to come down to is enough people either leaving and maybe setting up communities elsewhere, or when all this hits the fan, if you will, that various chunks of the United States are going to have to band together and maybe reform that notion of community. Another unintended consequence of all this is also going to be the fact that with the United States out of play, which is what's going to happen, the United States will be out of play because it will be broken up into chunks, despite, not to mention the time when we're actually actively fighting each other, which is going to really suck. Again, not calling for it, just predicting it. This is going to leave a massive global power vacuum. And the question is, what happens then? Obviously, China is growing as a regional hegemony in their area. Russia's kind of trying to vamp it back up to relive the glory days of the Soviet Union, and they're not quite there yet, but they're getting there. Western Europe is falling apart. What's going to fill that power vacuum? And that's going to be yet to be seen.
Right.
Or will the United States still be able to hold on to as much of that power in their little fractured groups? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But I do agree that, the only solution I've come up for myself is, you hear a lot of radical people online talk about, you got to fight, you got to do this. the thing is you just got to make your own life better. You know, at the end of the day, you have to accept if you don't like what's going on around you. Like you said about the acceptance, just accept that it's unto me. It's up to me to change my situation. The rest of it can, and unfortunately, I hate that. I hate that I don't feel like enough of a community with anybody to say, "Hey, let's do some activism. Let's go vote for this person." But I've gotten
We're past that.
yeah, I've gotten to the point where all I can do is improve my life, and that's what I'm going to focus on, and that's what I recommend everybody do because honestly, that's the way to fix it. Is to find like-minded people and forget about all this crap and enjoy yourself as a community.
Yeah, and basically
Anywhere you can find that.
exactly be the change you want to see, and then
Yeah.
make that community, and seek out other people that want to have that sense of community. And I think trying to do it as a grassroots movement in the United States to affect it politically, I think it's so far.
Yeah, I'm
we're so far down the toilet. I mean, it's not even going to happen at this
I'm
point.
more so just talk to the people that are some good people that are real people that aren't consumerist, empty shells, and concentrate on them. And if people are toxic, just leave them out. And
Yeah,
it's about the best you can do. Because I'm also not going to involve my life in ridiculous things to change things I don't think can be changed.
yeah. Alrighty, guys. Well, I think that's about all the time we got for the show today. You got anything else you want to add, Jason?
No, that's about it.
Alrighty, because I know I got to get to work here shortly. So
Yeah, and I know all that being said, it sounded depressing, but in reality, I'm kind of having a more positive attitude about
yeah,
outlook for the future for myself.
yeah, exactly.
And just finally just accepting that I'm leaving that crap behind and I'm going to do me.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, hopefully we'll be in a better position later on, and hopefully be able to pick up some of the pieces, and life will actually continue in a positive direction for everybody.
Yeah.
Again, if you guys like to, what you're seeing here on the show, make sure to press like and subscribe and all that stuff. And if you want to hear something on the show, shoot us an email, message it down in the comment section, what have you, and we'll be sure to cover that in upcoming episodes. So again, from our studios here in Nashville, have yourself a good night.
Have a good one.